Can't do a preview of what's going on with the Vikings without a little cameo from our buddy Paul Allen, the voice of the Vikings. But, the Vikings last year, the expectations were ridiculously high. They get to the Final Four. They swap out Case Keenum for Kirk Cousins. Hey, everything's going to be fine. We make the next step this year. That didn't happen for the Minnesota Vikings. They didn't even make it to the playoffs. So they had a very disappointing campaign, Chris, and the pressure is on this team now. There's only so much you can do in the offseason when you are strapped for cap space. They found a way to keep Anthony Barr. They've kept Kyle Rudolph around for now. They're talking to him about an extension.
Right.
They have that nucleus of great players who are all making a lot of money. But can they hold it together? Do they have the depth necessary where their young talents step up? And can they win games in primetime? They got 5 this year. Even though they didn't make the playoffs last year, they still have 5 primetime games. And last year they showed they were not ready for that stage. And Kirk Cousins has shown us throughout most of his career he's not ready for that stage. Whether it's fair or not, that's the reality. Perception is reality. And he's got to change the reality and the perception in 2019.
Yeah, I hear you all together there. I mean, you're right. It is on Kirk Cousins. I mean, you said it. The Minnesota Vikings are still a very dangerous football team. They got star power. They're a very top-heavy roster. And I think, the one thing you said there that I still question about Minnesota is the depth of their football team. Like we saw last year, guys got injured and they had a hard time kind of holding together, especially on the offensive line part. Hey, they got a little depth there, drafting Garrett Bradbury out of North Carolina State to play center. He's an awesome football player. He is certainly going to help out that football team, whether he plays center, guard early on, however it may be. I expect him to be the center. They got a guy like Josh Klein to add a little depth to the offensive line as well. He can play guard and move around in that interior spot. But yeah, overall, they just need to stay healthy up front. That's the big thing. Hey, you got year 2 of Dalvin Cook. I expect him to even be better than he was before. But the big question on the offensive side of the ball too is, hey, Kevin Stefanski's taken over as offensive coordinator. What's with him and the help of Gary Kubiak? What's this offense going to look like? That would be my big question right off the bat. I would expect they're going to get back to running the football. A little bit what we heard from Mike Zimmer last year, that he was disappointed and why they fired John DeFilippo. And then you go over to the defense. Yeah, you get Anthony Barr back. Great. You lost Sheldon Richardson. Okay, so they need a guy like Jalen Holmes, their second-round pick from 2 years ago out of Ohio State, to probably jump in there and show himself as a defensive tackle starter there. Xavier Rhodes, right, Mike? He's got to show up better and play like one of the better corners in football. He was a letdown last year. So, Everson Griffin issue last year. There was a lot of things that went on last year that led to the Minnesota meltdown, let's say.
And one thing that I don't think gets enough attention, the passing of Tony Sperano, the offensive line coach, one of the guys who was kind of the conscience for Coach Mike Zimmer, would say the things that need to be said sometimes to a very headstrong and opinionated head coach like Zimmer is, and that's fine. A lot of coaches are that way, but you need to have voices to balance you out, and Sperano was one of those voices. That happened so close in time to the start of training camp. I don't think they ever recovered from that. Now they have Gary Kubiak on board to help with that offense. That has kind of energized the vibe on that side of the ball, the zone blocking, drafting the players specifically for that, moving Pat Elflein to guard and putting first-rounder Garrett Bradbury at center. That's all going to help. The mobile blockers, the reshaping the offensive line, finding a running game again, getting more out of Dalvin Cook this year, 1 full year removed from his torn ACL. That's all going to make it easier for Kirk Cousins to throw the ball. I think last year there was so much of a focus on justifying the investment in Cousins, and John DeFilippo auditioning to be a head coach somewhere else, dialing up a lot of pass plays instead of running plays. And the Vikings got off track early, and they never could sustain momentum. And they still ended up with a winning record. They just weren't good enough to get to the postseason.
No, I mean, Mike, you made all the points I wanted to say. You're right. I mean, that's exactly what happened last year. You kind of, talked about the wormhole they went down, and then add on to it, they were really banged up on the offensive line and that aspect or that part of their football team too, where they were not patient with the run game. And when they did try to stay patient with the run game, they weren't very effective at blowing people off the line of scrimmage and being effective there. So that's the one thing I look forward to. And I think Mike Zimmer is going to really like that aspect of having Gary Kubiak a part of that offensive staff. Rick Dennison, who's been with Gary Kubiak. The run game, I think, will be better than we've seen in years past in Minnesota. I mean, I do think it's got potential with a guy like Dalvin Cook and some of the moves they made on the offensive line to, get closer back to the form of what we saw the year they went to the Final Four, which I believe that year they were a top 10, maybe the 6th best rushing offense in football. But that will make life easier on Kirk Cousins. It's going to make life easier on Diggs and Thielen. Last year they did. They became too one-dimensional. I didn't really ever go into games thinking they were going to be able to run the ball effectively. So that hurt Kirk Cousins and the passing game in general. And it's really not the style of football that Minnesota wants to play.
And it's Dalvin Cook this year with Alexander Mattison, the rookie from Boise State, who arrived via round 3. Latavius Murray is gone. And look, Latavius Murray had his moments. And like you said, the Vikings had a very good rushing offense in 2017 when Cook was injured week 4, and it was Murray the rest of the way. But Murray's always been a guy, he's got that high center of gravity, and he just, he either hits the hole or he doesn't. If he hits the hole, he gains 4 or 5 yards. Otherwise, he's flat on his back. And I just don't think he's been the guy that they really need to energize the running game. We'll see what the rookie does. But the other side of the coin, too, and I criticize the Vikings all the time for their poor performances last year in prime time. The way the schedule is structured this year, and I don't think we've touched on this, but I just noticed this now. Yes, they have 5 primetime games, but the first one isn't until week 8. They got 7 games that aren't primetime. The closest they come is a 4:25 p.m. Eastern Time kickoff at Chicago week 4. That's the big game in the first 7. But there isn't a primetime game until they host Washington week 8 on a Thursday night. I tell you what, by the time they get to the tough primetime games, the game at Dallas, the Monday night game at Seattle, the night game at L.A. against the Chargers, the night game at home against the Packers 2 days before Christmas, we'll already know whether or not they're worth a crap, basically. Yes. I mean, they don't have a bunch of primetime games to trip them up as they develop who they are. They've got half of a season almost to show us who they are before they get into those night games. And by then, it won't matter that they're night games. We'll know whether they're good or whether they're not good.
Yeah, no, you're right. We will. And, again, I think it gets a little overblown with the Kirk Cousins primetime thing. I know you're right. Perception is reality. He's going to have to perform on those stages, and their team's going to have to win for people to back off of that. I get it. I guess the big thing is with Minnesota, too, we got to take into account, hey, the NFC North's legit this year. There has, been some drastic changes, and, of course, there's some talented rosters. Where do you think they're going to end up in the NFC North ultimately? Do you think they're going to place higher than the Bears and the Packers when all said and done?
I think they're going to place higher than one of those 2 teams. I just don't know which one yet. I think they're going to finish second or higher in the division, and I think they will get to the playoffs this year at a minimum as a wild card. But, they're getting the Packers in Green Bay at the perfect time. Yep. Week 2, right? Very early in the Matt LaFleur experience as head coach of the team.
Right.
They don't have to worry about weather 2 years in a row that they've gone to Green Bay week 2, and I think that's going to help them surpass the Packers. The question is, what kind of a letdown will we see from the Bears? The Bears had changes. They got a new defensive coordinator. They had time to figure out what Matt Nagy and Mitch Trubisky is doing with that offense. I think the Vikings could win that division. People say all the time, oh, you're too hard on the Vikings. Look, folks, I think they can win the division this year. And the high-end analytics, every other year the Vikings make it to the playoffs. That's good enough for me. This is a playoff year for the Vikings. The question is it wild card or is it a special kind of season where they win the division and they force some people to come to Minnesota for the postseason, because we know that team far more likely to advance when they're playing their postseason games at home, Chris.
Yes, they are. I mean, that's a dangerous place to play. The Vikings are talented. There's no denying that. I mean, you certainly can make an argument. And, I could – if you told me the Vikings win the NFC North in December, I wouldn't go, oh, my gosh, I can't believe that happened. I would have never imagined it would have happened before the season started. I mean, I get it. There's too many big-time football players, but I don't think I can pick them to win the division. I don't think I can pick them to finish any better than third, really, when I really look at it. I think if you made me nail down the NFC North right now and you said, Chris, I want to have your rankings right now for May, I would go, okay, I'm still going to make the Chicago Bears king of the NFC North. I'm going to make the Packers and Green Bay second, and I think Minnesota overall is going to place third, like a highly competitive third, maybe an 8-8, kind of 9-7 type of third place. But I don't know. I just don't see a big-time playoff run from this football team.
Vegas says 9 wins for the Vikings. Are you over? Are you under? It sounds like you may say push.
I'm right around that push area. Yeah. I mean, all right. So if I had to pick over or under without the push, I would probably go under. I'm going to say 8-8, somewhere right around there. But yeah, I think if you made me push is probably where I want to go, but I don't want to be a wimp and pick push right now.
I think they're going to finish at least second in the division.
Okay.
The Packers have to prove it to me. And I'm the guy that's picked the Packers to be the NFC representative in the Super Bowl for the last 7 years. And I think first year with a head coach, I like what they're doing. I like the changes, but I think it's not going to be as easy as we think, and it is going to take some time. And we know that the guy who's at the middle of it all has a tendency to maybe get a little frustrated. How is he going to react to these changes, especially when they're out there in games that count and maybe things aren't working because people aren't on the same page and it's a work in progress? He hasn't had to deal with that ever, really, since he became a starter. He's had the same head coach his entire career. All right, we're going to take a break, but we're not done with our off-season examinations because we're trying to get them all done by the end of the week. We're going to do a third one today.
Whoa.
We're going to look at the Pittsburgh Steelers when this edition of Pro Football Talk Live continues right after this.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.